Welcome back to the Everyone is Azor Ahai, well, kind of, only the POV characters whose names are the titles of their chapters, and even then some of them aren't full Azor Ahai's theory. I've managed to get through 10 of the 16 named POV characters. Dany, Jon Snow, Victarion, Melisandre, Brienne, Jaime, Cersei, Bran, Tyrion and Davos, with varying degrees of success. Now we're down to the final 6. First up this episode, we have Samwell. Now, the biggest piece of evidence we have for this is that Samwell has done something that nobody else has. Not Daenerys, not Jon, not even Bran, and that's kill one of the others. He is Sam the Slayer after all. On top of that, he discovered that dragonglass kills the others, and that it doesn't kill the whites, and found out that Valyrian steel might also work. This information is invaluable in the fight against the others, and fits perfectly with what we know of Sam. He isn't really a fighter, he's a thinker. If the pen is mightier than the sword and knowledge is power, then Sam is one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, and has done more to fight the others than anyone else. Mormont's doomed ranging to find out what was going on with the whites may have been worth it after all. It gave the Night's Watch valuable information, without which the fight against the others might have been impossible. If Dany and Jon are the leaders, Jaime, Brienne and Victarion warriors, Davos an advisor and Bran a wizard, then Sam is the scribe of this group. But what about the prophecy? Well, Sam's birth could be into the Night's Watch along with Jon. Lightbringer could be his dragonglass dagger, but Samwell doesn't really fit. There are some interesting similarities between Sam and Lightbringer though. Randyll Tarly constantly tries to turn Sam into a warrior, a sword, but fails. He throws Samwell into a pond when he's a child, but it doesn't work, and Sam has to be rescued by Hyle Hunt of all people. The Lion is a trickier one, maybe being sent to Paxter Redwine and being bullied by Horror and Slobber, though there's not really a lion connection, besides the names of the Redwine twins. Nissa could reference how Sam becomes less of a craven, able to kill White Walkers after meeting Gilly and helping her escape Craster's Keep. This would be great, as the Randyll-Samwell relationship really does reflect the Lightbringer story, of somebody trying to make a strong sword, but it keeps shattering. The missing lion link is a problem though, as is the fact that Gilly doesn't get sacrificed. Yet, at least. Overall though, Samwell's best claim to be Azor Ahai doesn't rest in a prophecy, but in what he actually does. He isn't the kind of person that prophecies talk about or that Randyll wants him to be. He's a coward. Jon Snow thinks of Samwell. The world was full of cravens who pretended to be heroes. It took a queer sort of courage to admit the cowardice as Samwell Tarly had. On the ranging, Jeor Mormont tells him, "I don't care if you're so scared you foul your breeches, and I don't care if 1,000 wildlings are coming over the walls howling for your blood. You get those birds off." And he does. This matters because of what Jon says in Feast. He tells Sam the difference between what he thinks of himself and what he actually is. When Sam expresses fear, Jon says, "Sam, you saw whites come swarming up the fist, a tide of living dead men with black hands and bright blue eyes. You slew another. You lied and schemed and plotted to make me Lord Commander. From this day forth you will not call yourself a craven. You faced more things in this past year than most men face in their lifetimes." Sam thinks of himself as a craven. He looks like a craven, he sounds like a craven, but nonetheless what Jon says is true. Samwell is incapable of thinking of himself this way. He repeatedly says that it was the dragonglass, not me, that killed the other. I'm Sam the Scared, not Sam the Slayer. Randyll's tormenting of Sam by chaining him up for days and throwing him in ponds made him more afraid, not more of a warrior. It's also notable that the scene I've been taking most of these quotes from is the only one in the entire series that is told from two different perspectives, Samwell's and Jon's. If I was an editor trying to trim some fat off Dance, and Lord knows there's a lot of fat there to trim, the first thing I would say would be, why are we reprinting part of a Samwell chapter in this Jon chapter? We've heard all this before, and Jon's perspective doesn't even really add that much. We get Jon's disdain, but Samwell has already noticed that. The only insightful piece of inner monologue we get in this scene is Jon thinking, "Kill the boy in you and the one in him." Kill the boy is Maester Aemon's way of saying, "Grow up, mate." The boy in Sam Tarly is his memories of being tormented by his father, his memories of when he was a boy. This all ties in with the idea of Sam being Lightbringer. Randyll tried to forge him into a warrior, but only succeeded in shattering him, making him think he was useless and weak. But as Jon and we the readers know, Sam is more than that, has done more than that. Having two POV chapters with the same scene tells us that this is about how Sam sees himself versus how Jon sees him. Sam's arc may be to overcome his low self-esteem, possibly facing his father again. This could be the real moment of Sam's rebirth, or his final forging as Lightbringer. Whatever happens with all that thematic rubbish, if we stick to the actual plot, Sam has killed an other. He is quite literally already taking part in the fight against the darkness, and is the only person to have actually won a significant victory doing so. If that doesn't qualify you for at least being part of the Azor Ahai myth, I don't know what does. With Samwell accounted for, let's turn to Catelyn. Like Jon Snow, Catelyn is dead, but also like Jon Snow, maybe in the future, she's been resurrected. There's an interesting point to be made that Catelyn and Lady Stoneheart are substantially different people, to the extent where we can't really say that Stoneheart having Azor Ahai connections is the same as Catelyn having them. I'm going to ignore that though, because it's hard enough to make Catelyn fit into this theory as it is, without adding in more problems for me to overcome. We already mentioned that Stoneheart could be killed by Brienne, or possibly Jaime, in a Nissa situation. But that's speculation. What else is there beyond this? Well, Stoneheart was resurrected by Beric Dondarrion, giving her his life force, which itself was restored to him 7 times by Thoros of Myr, a Red Priest, so the R'hllor connection is strong. A lot had to happen for this to take place, by the way. Arya walked Nymeria in one of her wolf dreams to drag Catelyn out the Green Fork River, who then had to be found by Dondarrion. Then Harwin had to be there to beg Thoros to bring her back, but he wouldn't, so Beric did it instead. It would be an astounding set of coincidences, which already has one type of magical intervention from Arya, so it's possible that the Brotherhood Without Banners only found her because of some other magical shenanigans. Anyway, Stoneheart has some fiery life force in her, which is quite Azor Ahai-ish. Her death and resurrection happen in different places, but her death is surrounded by the salt of Guestrite and the smoke of tents being set on fire at the Red Wedding. It's notable that hers is the only rebirth that has actual salt involved rather than seawater or tears or something like that. But overall, Catelyn seems to be destined to be a Nissa, probably for Brienne. Jaime is another candidate, but does he need 2 Nissas? That's just greedy. You can tell I'm getting onto the more obscure ones because we're getting through this fast. And next up is the one that will probably be the hardest to argue for. Ned Stark. Ned's dead, and actually dead, not like Catelyn or Jon. And if he's going to have some miraculous resurrection like Davos, he's left it a bit late. To argue for him having any role in the future of the story at all, we're going to have to draw on some different ideas from all across the books. First, where is Ned right now? This is actually something of a mystery, as I'm sure you know. In Clash, Tywin sends Ned's bones to Riverrun, where Catelyn sees them and then sends them up north to Winterfell with Hallis Mullen. However, the Ironborn take Moat Cailin, and nobody knows if Hal and the bones made it past or not. In Dance, Barbary Dustin tells Theon that she means to feed Ned's bones to her dogs. She says that after Victarion seized Moat Cailin, I have been watching ever since. Should those bones ever emerge from the swamps, they will get no farther than Barrowtown. But the bones have not turned up, despite everything. Victarion never mentions them turning up at Moat Cailin in his chapters, though he might not have much cause to think about it. The question remains then, where are they? Well, if Hallis Mullen got past Moat Cailin and kept heading towards Winterfell, he must have not got there in time to see Theon or Ramsay, which we would have heard about from Theon. Where would he head instead? Well, we don't know. He might just have abandoned the bones. But if not, perhaps he would have tried to bring them to someone who might keep them safe. With Moat Cailin held by the Ironborn, he couldn't go back south, so he might have gone to one of the Stark's vassals. If he'd gotten stuck in the south, however, it would be a different story. He would presumably have headed back to Riverrun. The fact he didn't reappear there suggests he either didn't get stuck in the south, or he got intercepted and killed. If his killers knew the bones he was transporting were Ned's, then chances are we would know as well, as they'd probably be handed in to someone for a reward. So it seems that Hallis probably got past the neck, and that he and Ned's bones are in the north somewhere. Now, let's pivot and talk a little bit about the Winterfell crypts and the dead Starks within. The crypts are weird, and when Theon talks about them he mentions that the lowest levels are collapsed and that he's never been there. There's definitely a scary, mystical air about the ancient Starks, the kings of winter. We get to see some of them in one of Bran's visions when he's speeding back through time. And now the Lords Bran glimpsed were tall and hard, stern men in fur and chainmail. Some wore faces he remembered from the statues in the crypts, but they were gone before he could put a name to them. Then someone, possibly one of the kings of winter, performs a blood sacrifice to the weirwood, and the chapter ends with, Brandon Stark could taste the blood. Jon, Ned, Bran and Rickon all have disturbing dreams about the Winterfell crypts. Bran's includes the Three-Eyed Crow, and is a warning of Ned's death, as is Rickon's. So, what's the point? Well, there are lots of theories about what might happen with the Kings of Winter. A lot of them hinge on the Night's King, a probably mythical figure back in the Age of Heroes, who we hear from Old Nan via Bran was possibly a Stark. The Night's King was a 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, married a White Walker and went to live in the Nightfort, where he declared himself king and ruled for 13 atrocity-packed years, until Brandon the Breaker and Joramun the Wildling killed him. After his death it was discovered that he had been making sacrifices to the others, so his name was expunged from history. There are plenty of theories about the Night's King, but one of the relevant ones for us is that the Starks are all descended from him, and his White Walker queen. There's not a huge amount of evidence for it, but it would be an interesting possibility. Now, what do we know about whites? Jon Snow has been doing some experiments with dead bodies in the ice cells, as you do, leaving them there and seeing if they'll rise, but they haven't. This might suggest that others are needed to raise them, but the 2 dead Night's Watchmen rose to attack Mormont seemingly without any others around. We do know that whites can be skeletons and keep going. In Dance, Summer eats a severed white arm, which keeps moving until he cracks open the bone to get at the marrow within, implying that the bone is the important part that is needed to animate the whites. There's some kind of setup for how and why the Whites rise again being relevant. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Ned Stark and the Kings of Winter may rise again, perhaps to join the others like in the show, or, and this is where my theory interacts with all this rampant speculation, to join the fight against them. After all, we have a lot of dead people who aren't White Walkers. Cold Hands, Beric Dondarrion, Stoneheart, Jon Snow maybe, and even Patchface and Davos. Why not Ned? He probably won't be able to have much of a reunion with his family as a skeleton, and they probably wouldn't even recognise him, but it's the thought that counts. He's probably in the north somewhere, so he'll be in the right location to fight the others. And here's another thought. We already have one person, Alice Karstark, who fled to the wall for sanctuary with Jon Snow. Perhaps Hallis Mullen recently heard that Jon Snow became Lord Commander and is on his way north too, especially after everyone and their old nan starts declaring for the Boltons. Ned's bones could be heading to the wall. And I'll admit it, Ned rising again as a skeleton to fight the White Walkers is a bit of a weird one. I don't think it would undo the significance of his death, as he would be, a skeleton, and presumably die again as soon as the fight against the others was won or lost. It might only be mentioned in passing if the Kings of Winter rise and someone thinks they recognise Ned among them. Or we could get a Hallis Mullen prologue chapter that ends with him realising Ned's bones have vanished. That would be cool. But anyway, if you thought this one was a bit of a stretch, wait until you hear what I've got lined up for you next. Theon, Sansa and Arya. These three have given me the most trouble, and I've had to rack my tiny brain for a while to come up with anything that might tie these characters into the Azor Ahai stuff. Without further preamble, let's start off with Arya. Now, I know that I can't use Arya trick-stabbing the Night King in the TV show, so I won't do that. But I haven't really got anything else. Okay, let's think. Arya's storyline goes like this. In Thrones, she's with Ned and Sansa in King's Landing. She doesn't affect the plot much and has only 5 chapters. In Clash and Storm, she's wandering through the countryside trying to get to various places with various people. She gives us a boots-on-the-ground peasant's view of what the war is like and interacts with all sorts of people, like Roose Bolton and the Brotherhood Without Banners. Then she sets off for Braavos and her story truly detaches itself from the rest of the plot. She does meet Sam and have a chat with him, meaning Sam has now met 2 of the missing presumed dead Stark children, but her story is largely self-contained. But it's got to tie into one of the broader narratives at some point, right? Think of it this way, Arya's story surely won't end in Braavos, so what's it all building up to? You might say, the Faceless Men are training Arya to be an epic fighter, and that way she'll be able to join the crew to take on the White Walkers. But that's not really true. The Faceless Men are assassins. They rely on stealth to make their kills, not raw strength. This probably won't be very useful against the White Walkers. We do have the other thing the Faceless Men do, though, disguise themselves with other people's faces. Again, probably not very useful against the White Walkers, who would presumably be able to tell if you tried to disguise yourself as one of them. However, there's a connection here with a part of the Azor Ahai prophecy that we haven't yet mentioned, that in the fight against the darkness, all those who died fighting with Azor Ahai were reborn and brought back to life. I didn't mention this before, as I doubt this will actually happen in the books, it would kill a lot of the tension, but we do have a way to kind of bring characters back if need be. Arya could cut their faces off and impersonate them. Arya's story, as I said about 15 years ago in part 1, has identity as a key part of it. The Faceless Men are trying to drum her identity out of her, so she can truly be no one, faceless, if you will. That might tie in thematically if she has to take on the identity of somebody else during the fight against the others. But why would she have to do this? Well, plenty of reasons. If one of the big players like Daenerys or Jon dies, that might jeopardize the coalitions they hold together. The Dothraki, Unsullied, sellswords and freed slaves might break apart once Daenerys is gone, while Jon may be the only man south of the wall who the wildlings are willing to follow. I can imagine a squad of characters in a room talking over Dany's body, discussing what they can do. Someone will say, if only we knew someone who could impersonate other people using some sort of weird magic. There will be an awkward silence, and everyone will slowly turn to look at Arya. But why would Arya even be there in the first place, I hear you say? Well, consider that the Faceless Men see death as a gift given by their god, and how Jaqen H'ghar reacts to Arya saving him, Rorge and Baita. He says that 3 were saved, so 3 must die. They're clearly not fans of cheating death. Imagine their reaction when they hear of the White Walkers. We know something weird is going on, as Jaqen is at the Citadel disguised as a novice, trying to get something, probably a glass candle. He knows about the others from Sam, and will likely send word back. The Faceless Men would see the Whites as offensive to their religion, and send Arya and possibly others to help destroy them. So Arya has the motive and the means of playing a part in the Azor Ahai myth. Her whole story is one long narrative of rebirth, and her Lightbringer could be Needle. The evidence is mostly speculative and based around the assumption that Arya has to come back into the wider plot at some point, and what she's been doing this whole time should tie into how she impacts her story. But I kinda like it. Now, Sansa. I mentioned before when talking about Bran that Sansa moves in the political arena, and that causes some issues for our theory. Sansa is one of the POV characters with the least mystical connections. Her direwolf was killed before she could develop any warg powers. She doesn't even believe in the old gods. The only time she ever had any connection to them was because the Godswood in the Red Keep was the site of her political scheming with Ser Dontos. Sansa has no connection to Azor Ahai. Theory over? Well, no, not entirely. Talking about Sansa means we have to bring up the actual logistics of the fight against the others. Is it just going to be a couple of jokers going off on their own north of the wall? Is it going to be a defensive battle against all the Whites and White Walkers? Probably a bit of both. And for a big full-scale battle against Whites across the whole of the wall, the humans are going to need a big army. The Night's Watch is depleted, even with the Wildling alliance that will probably fall apart now Jon Snow is dead. Even worse, if a battle between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings breaks out, with Stannis' men involved too, everyone could die and no one would be left to fight the others. The rest of Westeros has been ravaged by war, and has few soldiers left to give to the cause. Except for 2 of the 7 kingdoms, Dorne and the Vale. Sansa is currently in a position of power in the Vale, the natural daughter of the Lord Protector and closest friend to the sickly Sweet Robin. Littlefinger told her he would give her the Vale of Winterfell, which may very well happen even if Littlefinger isn't involved. Sansa could also call on any remaining Tully forces, and who knows, she is technically a Lannister, so maybe she could get them involved as well. Sansa might therefore provide the army to defend Westeros through her political machinations. It's a fitting way for her to contribute, and an army presumably has to come from somewhere, and it's probably not going to be Doran Martell. And finally, Theon. When I started this theory back during the Cambrian explosion, I started by talking about identity, and along with Arya, Theon's is a story most wrapped up with identity. By the end of Dance, he seems to have struggled his way back to thinking of himself as Theon. When Asher sees him show up at Stannis' camp, physically as a shadow of the man he was. Asher initially thinks he's an old man. His face was a skull with skin, his hair bone-white and filthy, and he stank. Theon says to her, "Sister, see, this time I knew you." A fun role reversal from when they met back in Clash when Theon didn't recognise Asher. She says, "Theon?" His lips skinned back in what might have been a grin. Half his teeth were gone, and half of those still left him were broken and splintered. "Theon," he repeated. "My name is Theon. You have to know your name." Truly a triumphant moment where the same phrase that suppressed his identity before is uttered to reclaim it. A shame he didn't say Theon, Theon, it rhymes with peon or something like that. But where do we see Theon's story going from here? He can't really go back to being who he was, as we see in his decrepit physical state. The deliberate contrast of his 2 reunions with Asher in Clash and Dance is a way of reminding us of this. And we probably wouldn't want Theon to go back to being who he was, because he was kind of a prick. This doesn't seem to have changed all that much either. He doesn't seem to recognise he was wrong in killing those 2 Miller's boys, trying to justify it to the Weirwood and then thinking they don't understand when the Spearwives call him out on it. Asher had plans to have a do-over of the Kingsmoot using the pretext that Theon wasn't there, though whether that was to put him on the Seastone chair with Asher as the power behind the throne or to give herself another chance, we don't know. Either way, it's out the window now, as Theon is clearly not a candidate for King of the Iron Islands in his sorry state, and no one's going to call a whole other Kingsmoot for him now, if they ever would have done before. More likely Asher will get another chance if and when Euron dies, and I can't see Theon even trying to stake a claim when that happens. So what does the rest of the story hold for Theon? He can't fight thanks to his missing fingers and toes, he's in no fit state to lead anything. Perhaps the answer to this question can be found by asking another. What does Theon want? A sword in his hand, to die as Theon, not as Reek. The kindest thing now for Theon might well be a meaningful death. He could have had that helping Jane Poole escape Winterfell, but he survived a little while longer. Let's also not forget the meta factor that Gurm is trying to cram 20 living POV characters into one book. Not all of them are going to make it, and Theon seems like one of the candidates for first to die. If we look back at his sample chapter in Winds of Winter, the debate about what will happen to Theon isn't whether he will die, but which god he will be sacrificed to. Stannis and the Queen's men want to sacrifice him to R'hllor, but Asher, the Ravens and the Northern clansmen want to sacrifice him to the Old Gods. Either way, Theon's role in this Azor Ahai myth could be as a sacrifice, just like Cersei or Stoneheart, though it would be less of a Nissa Nissa and more simply a gift to the gods. If so, his identity arc is itself a part of the Azor Ahai myth. What matters for these sacrifices is apparently King's Blood, and Theon has that. But Reek doesn't. After all, King's Blood isn't a genetic thing. It's not like there's a chromosome that determines if you're a king or not. Consider this. Would using Stannis' blood have worked for Melisandre's magic if it had been taken before he declared himself a king? What about before Robert became king? This question is brought up in the story regarding whether Aemon Battleborn has King's Blood, a concept alien to the wildlings he would supposedly be king of as the son of Mance, but apparently enough to justify getting him away from Melisandre as soon as possible. King's Blood seems to be about identity and what people are believed to be in this story, with false kings, pretenders, usurpers, petty kings, beggar kings, kings beyond the wall, and so on. Therefore, sacrificing Theon might not have worked if it had been done when he himself still believed he was Reek, or not Theon. But now he's recovered his identity, he can use it for a good cause. In the sample chapter, Theon thinks, He means to kill me. The thought was queerly comforting. Death did not frighten Theon Greyjoy. Death would mean an end to pain. The chapter ends with the ravens saying Tree and Theon, supporting Ash's suggestion to sacrifice Theon to a weirwood. Theon's reaction? Theon Greyjoy smiled. They know my name, he thought. Who knows what use Theon's blood would have for the old gods? We know Bran can taste the blood of sacrifices made even in the distant past, so maybe it'll just sate the cannibalistic urges he's built up after eating all those Night's Watch deserters and Jojen. Or perhaps Theon's sacrifice will have some greater meaning. Hopefully, as that's the only way I can see Theon having a role in the Azor Ahai myth. And that wraps up that. 16 characters, 16 Azor Ahais. Daenerys and Jon Snow as the mythical figures leading the charge. Jaime, Brienne, Victarion and Tyrion as their companions. Bran orchestrating it all from afar. Melisandre flailing around wildly nearby. Davos offering his sage advice. Samwell providing the information they need. Cersei, Stoneheart and Theon being sacrificed for the greater good. Sansa getting the armies of the North, the Vale and the Riverlands to head to the wall and defend the realm. Arya impersonating the heroes when they fall, to give the soldiers the belief they need to fight on. And Ned Stark rocking up as a skeleton to join the fight. Some of these are admittedly longer shots than others, but remember what I said at the start. There's something that ties all the named POVs together. Why not this? Oh, and by the way, if Barristan Selmy and Arianne Martell do actually have their names in the titles of the chapters in Winds of Winter, the whole theory's off.